Action. Oh my gods, I forgot to write a cold open. Hi everyone, I'm Luna. Welcome to the Lunarium. After I made a video about understanding borderline personality disorder, some people asked me to share my own personal experience living with borderline personality disorder, or as it's often shortened to, BPD. I highly recommend that you go and watch that video first. If you haven't already, click the link above, because in that video, I go into a lot more of, like an academic description as well as a personal description of what the symptoms are. For those who don't know, BPD is a cluster B personality disorder. Personality disorders are permanent, so they can't be cured, and at least with BPD, there isn't even medication that can treat the illness. There are disagreements within the psychiatric community about what causes BPD. Some people have theories about different brain structures for people with BPD, such as an enlarged amygdala or different chemicals in the brain, and some people believe that BPD is actually a form of complex PTSD. In other words, it's a set of learned behaviors that is an attempt to shield the person from ongoing trauma. As far as I can tell, there is no clear consensus within the psychiatric community about whether BPD is acquired through nature or nurture. Some people seem to have been born with it. There is a large percentage of people living with BPD who can point to a certain traumatic experience or experiences that seem to have been the catalyst for developing BPD, but not everyone living with BPD lives through a traumatic experience. As for me, I am not exactly sure where my BPD came from, although I think that my early childhood was a series of traumatic experiences. It's hard for me to describe what I experienced as abuse or neglect because I don't think that it was intentional or severe enough to merit those terms, but I definitely know that I grew up with two parents who were living with trauma and mental illness that they weren't acknowledging or addressing. And so it manifested itself in lots of unhealthy ways. I spent a lot of my childhood feeling afraid or abandoned. That being said, I grew up with two siblings who lived in the same household and don't have BPD, so I don't really know. So either my early childhood household is the catalyst for developing BPD, or I was born with it, because there have been differences about me from a very, very early age. I've always felt things really deeply, like anything that goes wrong, it's not just a little hurt, it's a big, big hurt. And also, from a very early age, I struggled a lot with transitions and change. Starting from preschool, I've had really tumultuous friendships where every few years of my childhood and even later, I would have these dramatic breakdowns of friendships involving lots of fighting, where then I would need to find a completely new set of friends. And then within a few years, that group would fall apart and, the cycle would begin again. Just relationships in general have always been really up and down for me. I started getting really moody around, fourth grade or so. I really struggled with feeling like I didn't have enough attention. So I did things like I was on crutches for 6 months because I was faking having an injury. For whatever reason, my childhood self thought that that was a good way to get attention. I even tried to injure myself sometimes so that I would get attention. I also would just kind of sit around a lot thinking about how empty life felt and meaningless. And I don't think that that's very normal for children. My borderline tendencies got a lot worse after my mom committed suicide when I was 12. Losing my mom that way really just worsened my self-image and my fear of abandonment, and just like all of my, possibly mentally ill tendencies just grew a lot stronger. Part of feeling things really strongly, which is one of the BPD symptoms that I exhibited from a really early age, is that I also feel anger very, very strongly. Unfortunately, I was afraid of being angry. After my mom died, I was very, very angry, and I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't feel like I could be angry at my mom, and I was afraid that if I got angry at anyone in my family, they would go away like my mom had. So I turned my anger out on the only people I thought were safe, which was my friends. So I started yelling at my friends all the time, just lashing out at them over the littlest of things. Obviously, this was a very unhealthy way of dealing with my emotions, in addition to being completely not fair to my friends who were just trying to be there for me. My friends put up with about a year of this before they had enough, and they were sending me messages that if I didn't change how I was dealing with things, then they would stop being my friend. And it was around that time that I started self-harming. And self-harming provided an outlet for my anger where I could take it out on myself instead of taking it out on other people. And it gave me a feeling of control. Basically, I started self-harming. I stopped yelling at my friends, and my friends, reacted positively, which further made me think self-harming was a good thing. Watch my video about what I wish I knew before I started self-harming, because obviously self-harming was a really destructive behavior that I just wish I had never done in the first place. Even though I stopped lashing out at my friends all the time, I still was a pretty unhealthy friend. I constantly told everyone who cared about me that they were going to leave me. Like, they'd say, "I love you," and I'd say, "You won't soon," or "You're going to leave me," all the time. This was a subconscious attempt at protecting myself. It's like this form of wishful thinking where I was trying to feel like I have power over the situation. So, if I can just be prepared enough and already know it, then it wouldn't take me by surprise and devastate me. I want to be clear, because I think I've had a lot of years of therapy, so I've come to a lot of realizations about my old behavior. At the time, I didn't know why I behaved the way I did. The thing about BPD, particularly when BPD hasn't been treated, is so much of what BPD is involves acting and not knowing why you're doing it. Engaging in self-destructive behavior, engaging in toxic behavior that's hurtful to other people, doing things that, go against your own interests, doing things that make you feel worse. All of this I was doing, and I didn't know why. I had all of this emotion that I couldn't bear, and I was just doing whatever I could to try and make it a little better. Another symptom of BPD is not having a strong sense of identity. And this is something that I've suffered a lot my entire life. I'm a lifelong Harry Potter fan, despite She Who Must Not Be Named's disgusting bigotry. And I've never known what Hogwarts house I would be in. I've never been able to see how any positive attribute like bravery, loyalty, intelligence, or even ambition could apply to me. And obviously this is a really trivial example. My lack of identity caused much more serious harm. Being a teenager already means you're trying to figure out who you are. Being a teenager with BPD makes that process of self-discovery so much more difficult. I was a lot more susceptible to peer pressure and to trends. So like when I was a teenager, the major fashion was to wear like Hollister or American Eagle and have the giant name of the brand everywhere all over the clothing. The 2000s was not a great time for fashion, let me tell you. And even though I hated all of those clothes and wanted to dress closer to how I dress now, I still dressed basically exactly like everyone else was, just because I thought I was able to like convince myself that I liked it, even though I really, really didn't. I also lied a lot in an attempt to make people like me, and it was subconscious. Like, I didn't decide to lie. It would just come out. And while I didn't end up going down the after school special route of peer pressure, if things had gone that way, I would have been really susceptible to being pressured into imbibing substances that I didn't want to. Part of not having a strong sense of identity was that all of my sense of self came from external sources. So if I was praised or something good happened, like I received a good grade, I would feel good about myself. But if something bad happened, like I was rejected or even felt like I wasn't getting the kind of attention I wanted, then I would feel completely terrible about myself. Relationships, therefore, have always kind of been how I determined my sense of self. I have a really hard time knowing who I am unless I can put myself in context with other people. So I'm sort of a good person because I know these people like me, that, I'm worthwhile. But if I lose a relationship, my entire identity falls apart. When I was 15, my dad bribed me into going to therapy. I got a book and a Starbucks every time that I went. And even though I was initially unwilling, eventually I found that therapy was helpful, and I started to have more awareness of why I was doing the things that I did. So things started to get a little better after that, although I still was a very, very unhappy teenager. Cut to when I was 17 years old, and the fact that I lacked a sense of self made me foolishly think that I was straight. And the one thing came along that can always make everything worse: a boy. My need for validation and attention meant that I fell for the first person who gave me any attention. Unfortunately, that person was the boy that one of my best friends was in love with. I really thought at that time that if I could fall in love, all of my problems would be solved. That was the answer to feeling better about myself and having a life worth living. So I made the selfish choice, and I chose to date him even though I knew it would hurt my friend. And as I'm sure anyone who's been a teenage girl can imagine, I lost almost all of my friends, including my favorite person. This was a really devastating and destabilizing time, but I convinced myself that everything was going to be okay because at least I had my boyfriend, who became my new favorite person. But then boyfriend broke up with me and said he'd never even loved me in the first place, and I just completely fell apart. I became suicidal and I was hospitalized for suicidal ideation for the first time. I dropped out of school and I ended up in a residential treatment facility for adolescents in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. In other words, I entered the troubled teen industry. This began my many years-long cycle of treatment, getting better, self-destruction, and then institutionalization. And these might have been the years when I was the most toxic of a person. I was in so much pain then that I really didn't care how my actions were affecting other people. I was in so much pain that I was doing whatever I could to feel better. I compulsively engaged in self-destructive behavior, such as eating really unhealthy things, spending thousands of dollars on things I didn't need, or self-harming. I really just didn't care how my actions affected other people or what the long-term consequences of those actions might be. I did all kinds of really, really harmful things, like cheating on my girlfriend repeatedly, or telling people I was going to take my own life as a way to get attention, or actually trying to take my own life, even though I knew that it would really, really hurt people who loved me. I'm really ashamed of how I acted during those years. Unfortunately, I basically ran through the patience of everyone in my life. Everyone from friends to family to even therapists and psychiatrists had enough of me. After I was hospitalized for, I don't even know the dozenth time, my dad found a boarding care in my city that promised to feed and medicate me, and he dropped me off there and just kind of wiped his hands at me. That began the worst year of my life, and I have a lot of pretty terrible years to choose from. As someone who literally feels like I might die if I don't get enough attention, it was so unbearable to be more alone than I'd ever been in my entire life. And that definitely didn't help that the board and care did not take care of me, did not feed me, and had things like feces all over the walls. It was a really, really awful time. And so I jumped into a relationship with the first person who showed me any kindness, even though, again, that was a man, even though I didn't know him and ignored a ton of red flags. Unfortunately, he was incredibly abusive. And when the abuse started, it literally seemed like it was better to be abused than to be alone. Like, with my BPD brain, that's really how it felt. And then once the abuse escalated, I was already trapped. If anyone's curious about being in an abusive relationship and what's that like or anything like that, I would be willing to make a video on it. For now, I'll just say that it took me a year to get out. I know that a year doesn't sound like that long of a time, but it was long enough for him to abuse me in every way possible, over and over again, and for him to completely ruin what was left of my life. The only reason I was able to get out is because my best friend, my favorite person, was willing to give me another chance and came back into my life and supported me as I extricated myself from hell. And that experience was terrible enough that I reflected on what brought me there. I came to the unavoidable conclusion that a lot of what happened to me, a lot of the bad things that had happened to me, were because of my poor decision making. And I realized that if I ever wanted a chance at a happy, healthy life, then I needed to change. I don't necessarily have a happy life now, but it's definitely a lot better. I have pretty positive relationships with my family. I have some friends, and I have coping skills to help me with a lot of my self-destructive instincts. I definitely am not going to lie. The truth is that living with BPD is still incredibly hard, and I struggle all the time. And, I'm still prone to really dark days, and there are definitely ups and downs. But thanks to a lot of therapy, but more importantly, deciding that I wanted to be healthier and really working hard to avoid hurting myself and others, things in my life are better. It's definitely a work in progress, and I'm hoping to keep growing, but I'm really proud of all of the progress I've been able to make. I hope that my story can help other people who live with BPD feel less alone, or can help people understand what living with BPD is like. It's a mental illness that is stigmatized a lot, even within the psychiatric industry, and I really wish people could see that people with BPD are people, and we're all just doing the best that we can. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. Please, pretty please. I'm really trying to grow my channel, and it would help me a lot. I'd really love to hear from anyone else who lives with BPD, if you can relate to any of my experiences, or if it seemed different than yours. And I'd also be happy to answer any questions that anyone has. Please, as always, take care of yourselves. Until next time, bye.